PR Military Analytics. Russia's brutal and unreasonable invasion of Ukraine in February 2022 disrupted the European security architecture. It also changed the calculus of risk that underpins the security policies of Russia's neighbors. This shift has also been sharpened in the Arctic and other seas, long regarded by many as a highly cooperative and unusually peaceful part of international relations. Especially in recent months, serious contacts have occurred between the NATO navies and the Russian navies in the Baltic Sea, the Mediterranean, the Pacific, and the Black Sea. These aggressive and inexperienced moves of the Russian Navy are raising the tension in these seas. On the U.S. coasts and in the Arctic, one of the main effects of the Ukrainian war was on the Russian Navy, which was indisputably disintegrated and badly damaged. The Russian Navy, which was frightened at sea before the war, was dragged to the brink of great destruction afterwards. Mobility in the Arctic Sea, Baltic Sea, and North Atlantic Ocean increased considerably during this period as NATO warships tried to secure the Baltic Sea. Russia frequently continued to plague the U.S. coast with its most important warships. The most recent example of this was the encounter that took place in the past few days. In recent reports, the Russian frigate, Admiral Gorshkov, essentially the first warship converted to use zircon hypersonic cruise missiles, was seen moving towards the east coast of the United States. Judging by the data from open sources at the moment, the Russian warship has already crossed half the Atlantic Ocean, which seriously worried Washington. Since the launch range of zircon missiles can reach 2,000 kilometers, the Admiral Gorshkov guided missile frigate is under close surveillance by NATO naval forces during its maiden voyage. This came after the Royal Navy intercepted the Gorshkov as they crossed the English Channel. More recently, the Russian ship was being tracked in the Atlantic by the Portuguese Navy and was expected to surround Africa. But radar surveillance sites suggest Admiral Gorshkov made an unexpected maneuver after his last voyage in the Mediterranean. Gorshkov was not expected to make such a move. However, we know that Russian President Vladimir Putin constantly wants to create a threat. For this reason, it brings the ship closer to the U.S. shores at regular intervals. While these moves by the Admiral Gorshkov frigate brought Washington to the red alert level, the Russian ship also started to conduct exercises. Last month, the frigate Admiral Gorshkov implemented zircon hypersonic missile strikes during Atlantic exercises. According to senior officials, the crew of the frigate currently on a mission in the western part of the Atlantic Ocean stated that it carried out its zircon hypersonic missile attack on a target simulating an enemy warship at a distance of more than 900 kilometers. In addition to these moves of Admiral Gorshkov, a Russian spy ship circling near the U.S. coast also caused a serious activity in the Pentagon in recent weeks. The U.S. Coast Guard began tracking a Russian ship believed to be an intelligence-gathering ship off the coast of the Hawaiian Islands. The U.S. Coast Guard said that these expeditions do not pose a complete threat at the moment, but they are following the issue closely. While the foreign military vessels may freely pass through the exclusive economic zone of the United States, it has often been observed that the foreign-flagged military vessels operate and navigate within the intervention area of Coast Guard Zone 14. According to customary international laws. However, the sudden appearance of a Russian ship due to the war in Eastern Europe can cause different interpretations. This is not Russia's first spying move from the sea. As you may recall, the actions of Viktor Lenov, a Russian surveillance ship sailing off the coast of South Carolina and Florida, were determined to be unsafe as he did not use flagship lights in low-visibility weather and did not respond to commercial ships' attempts to communicate to avoid them. The USCG said in a statement that it continues to coordinate with DoD partners, provide updates on foreign ship movements and activities, and meet availability as appropriate to promote international maritime norms. These tensions began to shift from the U.S. coast towards the Arctic Sea. We can show the Arctic Sea as one of the regions where the war's mobility is felt the hardest. First of all, the Arctic Council ceased to function when its 7 members outside of Russia suspended participation in official meetings. This deprived the region of the main intergovernmental space for cooperation, then seeking security. Finland and Sweden requested to join NATO. Also, Russian hybrid tactics leveled up. Among other activities, NATO members such as Norway and nearby states were alarmed. Finally, heightened security concerns are also evident in newly released policy documents such as the U.S. Arctic Strategy, The first Arctic strategy across the U.S. government since 2013 states that Russia's war in Ukraine has increased geopolitical tensions in the Arctic and created new risks of undesirable conflict. At this point, it is emphasized in the U.S. national security strategy. However, the Arctic has not been a top security priority for the United States or NATO in recent years, and there is a heavy debate that this may be an issue that needs to be addressed as tensions escalate. Russia's military interests in the Arctic appear to be ostensibly defensive. Defending the sea-based nuclear deterrent second strike capability operating out of the Kola Peninsula is one of them. Protecting its regional economic initiatives, particularly oil and gas megaprojects such as Yamal, LNG, and Vostok petroleum initiatives, and the Northern Sea Route, which Russia assertively sees as a future global trade route, are what Russia calls defense-oriented implications. However, there are serious threats behind them. In addition, it would be incorrect to say that Russia only has defense targets. So what you mean better? Russia also has offensive targets. First, it aims to use the Arctic as a staging area for power transmission to the North Atlantic Ocean, specifically via the Greenland-Iceland-UK gap. Secondly, Europe may consider hybrid activities to intimidate or coerce Arctic countries. Finally, what would happen in a broader NATO-Russia conflict, which is unlikely but not unthinkable? It would be conceivable that Moscow, escalating to such a war, risked a limited attack on Norway or Finland in order to protect its critical nuclear assets on the Kola Peninsula by creating larger nuclear power plants, for example, creating defensive depth through the installation of more western access blocking systems in relatively easily defended areas west of its border. This scenario is similar to Cold War-era horrors. Perhaps a more likely modern conflict scenario would involve long-range precision strikes of high-value assets such as Norwegian or future Finnish F-35s and the infrastructure needed to enable them to fly. This will mean that tension in the region will increase. The war in Ukraine did not materially change these fundamental interests of Russia. Should Finland possibly join NATO? The need to maintain nuclear second strike capability stationed on the Kola Peninsula will not decrease or even increase if this scenario happens. Critical military facilities such as the Northern Fleet Strategic Submarine Base at Gijevo will be less than 200 kilometers from a new NATO country's border. In response, Russian Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu said that new military bases would be established after meeting with President Putin in December. This was a very clear threat, and there is a consensus among the members of NATO that needs to take immediate action in this regard. Also, despite the dwindling European market for Russian Arctic fossil fuels and the evaporation of foreign investment in such projects from sanctioning countries, there is little evidence that Putin intends to curb his economic ambitions in the region. Obviously, millions of dollars of investments are transferred here. However, it is thought that this is the main reason for the elbow contact between the USA and Russia in the region. This video examines Russia's pre-war Arctic military assets before exploring which of these assets were used and potentially lost in the invasion of Ukraine. This method leads us to a conclusion that assesses the potential war damage, as well as the impact of the sanctions on Russia's defense industry. After its serious losses in the region, Russia may bring Admiral Gorshkov, which it has used as a threat on the U.S. coast, to the region. Again, however, we can understand that the USA and NATO do not overestimate the threats that may come from Russia. It was an expected move that Vladimir Putin would increase his threats as he was cornered, and seeing that this does not work, Putin will now be faced with much clearer NATO decisions, even if he continues his routine activities and wants to bring Russian interests to the fore in different regions. We will be able to see all this much more clearly in the coming days. The Black Sea has long been the scene of a rivalry between Russia and the West, strengthened by the Ukraine war. The giant pond on Europe's southeast flank has long been an arena of international competition between the US and its European allies on the one hand, and Russia and its sphere of influence on the other. This dynamic has been strengthened by Russia's invasion of Ukraine. The collision of a Russian Su-27 fighter jet with an American surveillance drone the other day was a stark reminder to many countries operating in and around the Black Sea of the region's potential to be a flashpoint. At this point, the attitude of the U.S. administration and the Russian administration further clarified some facts in the world order. The balance was fragile, but the U.S. administration is professionally keeping the balance against this crazy move. Let's examine in detail the event that brought the Black Sea to its flashpoint. As is known at the beginning of this week, an event occurred that would increase the temperature in the Black Sea to the maximum level. The incident took place amid escalating tensions between Russia and the United States as the Biden administration tried to isolate Moscow over sanctions and its invasion of Ukraine. A Russian Sukhoi Su-27 fighter jet collided with the U.S. Air Force MQ-9 Reaper user air system over the Black Sea in the early morning. Russia forced the plane to land in the Black Sea in what U.S. forces called an unsafe and unprofessional interception. US military officials said the unarmed Reaper drone was flying on a typical reconnaissance mission when it was captured by two Russian Su-27 fighter jets about 100 kilometers southwest of Ukraine's Crimean Peninsula, which Russia uses as a base to launch devastating attacks. The encounter of the U.S. drone performing a typical reconnaissance mission with Russian warplanes escalated tensions between the Kremlin and the White House. The collision occurred just after 7 a.m. as two Russian Su fighter jets flew into the MQ-9 Reaper drone over international waters west of Crimea. The U.S. European Command said in a statement. The statement also said the Russian pilots were trying to disrupt the U.S. plane before it collided several times before the collision. The Su-27 were reported to have dumped fuel on the MQ-9 and flew in front of it in an unprofessional manner. Later, one of the Russian fighters crashed into the propeller of the drone. It resulted in U.S. forces having to drop the MQ-9 in international waters. The incident shows a lack of competence as well as being insecure and unprofessional. After the collision, the Russian Su-27 is believed to have landed at an airbase in occupied Crimea. It's not known whether there was any damage to the Su-27. Russia's defense ministry, on the other hand, denied any collision and claimed that the drone, which cost $32 million, was shot down due to the mishandling of the pilot. Also, the Russian defense ministry claimed that the U.S. plane was flying with the transponders turned off. Transponders are communication devices that allow aircraft to be tracked. In another development, Russia will try to find and recover the remains of a U.S. military drone shot down in the Black Sea. With that, Russia plans to benefit from the technology of the unmanned aerial vehicle. The White House took steps to protect its military property after an advanced U.S. Air Force drone collided with Russian warplanes in international airspace. National Security Council spokesman John Kirby said in a statement that the United States does not want the wreckage of the downed MQ-9 Reaper drone to fall into the hands of anyone outside the United States. For this, Turkey, Romania, and Bulgaria, which have a coast on the Black Sea, should take action to save the Allied aircraft. Among these three countries, Turkey is the first candidate to save the U.S. plane in terms of its Navy power and Black Sea influence, and also its relations with Russia. In other words, the USA has to recover the MQ-9 together with Turkey. The confrontation of other countries with Russia in the middle of the Black Sea has the potential to further escalate the current tension. On the other hand, the unprofessional behavior of Russian planes and the statements made by the Russian Ministry of Defense are quite remarkable and reckless. The only question that comes to mind following this incident is, did Vladimir Putin go crazy? The next move of Putin, which caused the tension in the Black Sea to rise, is a matter of curiosity. As is known, Russia's invasion of Ukraine has escalated. The tension between Moscow and Washington and the Black Sea has begun to come to the fore even more in this time period. Russia blockaded Ukrainian ships in its port. However, Ukraine was able to export its grain by sea under an agreement signed last July between the two warring countries. At the same time, Ukraine attacked Russian naval ships in the Black Sea and in the port. In April, a Ukrainian missile sank Moskva, the flagship of Russia's Black Sea Fleet. The war also mobilized the North Atlantic Treaty Organization in particular by strengthening ties between Washington and members of the Russian border, including Poland and the Baltic states. NATO countries have poured billions of dollars in military aid to support Ukraine. However, the alliance tried to avoid direct conflict with Russia, a nuclear-armed state. NATO countries have consistently avoided engaging in a direct war with Russia. However, we will wait and see if the latest event in the Black Sea skies can change this stance. Now let's take a closer look at the geography of the Black Sea. The Black Sea is larger than California, with 6 countries on its shores. 3 of these, Turkey, Romania, and Bulgaria, are NATO members, while others, such as Ukraine, are friends of the alliance, which has long felt the Black Sea is necessary for efforts to contain Russia. Turkey has a tremendous influence on the Black Sea as it controls the two straits, the Dardanelles and the Bosphorus, which ships must cross in order to cross between the Black Sea and other global waterways. The 1936 Montreux Convention gives Turkey the right to close the straits to most military traffic in times of war. This was a mandate that Russia used after its invasion of Ukraine last year. The Black Sea is crucial to Russian President Vladimir Putin's efforts to expand Moscow's influence and has been a focus of instability resulting from it. In recent years, the periphery has been the scene of Russia's war with Georgia. In 2008, political upheavals against Russian-backed leaders in Ukraine and Belarus, and a war between Azerbaijan and Armenia in 2020, eventually mediated by Moscow. But Mr. Putin's biggest power play around the Black Sea was Russia's invasion of Crimea, a strategic peninsula that it seized from neighboring Ukraine in 2014. This strengthened Russia's position in the Black Sea and gave it control of Russia's only hot water port, Sevastopol. Russia's enemies responded by intensifying their own military maneuvers around the Black Sea. NATO members made regular surveillance flights, and the US and Britain frequently sent warships, although international conventions barred them from staying more than 21 days. The subsequent Russian invasion of Ukraine caused both sides to further expand their maneuvers in the region. In addition, Turkey's closure of the straits to most military traffic in order to prevent Russia from supporting its naval forces against Ukraine with ships coming from other places also prevented ships from the United States and other NATO countries from entering the Black Sea. But the air is still clear. So NATO members have stepped up surveillance flights over and around the city, and Russia has responded with warplanes as a show of strength. With the recent tensions, Turkey is becoming indispensable for NATO in the Black Sea and beyond. So let's take a look at the factors that make Turkey indispensable. Ankara has been a calming and healing balm for the world since the Russian invasion of Ukraine began. Whatever the outcome of the ground war, the Russian Navy will remain barren in the Black Sea for the foreseeable future. Ukraine has the potential to become an important Black Sea naval power on its own. From the smoke and dust of war, Turkey emerged as an important global player by underlining the importance of Ankara in maintaining regional peace. Ankara's use of authority given by the 1936 Montreux Convention to close the Turkish straits to foreign warships going to conflict zones once again reminded Ankara of its importance for the region. Turkey became the dominant naval power in the northern waters. This is the new reality in the region for policymakers at NATO. Russia's attack on Ukraine is a reminder of Turkey's importance in the Black Sea region for 3 reasons. For example, it is in NATO's interest that one of its members has sovereign control over the Turkish straits, which has directly affected Russia's action against Ukraine. In addition, Russia is legally prevented from reinforcing its Black Sea fleet with ships from the Pacific, Baltic or Northern fleets, since no ship can enter the Black Sea. Turkey's closure of the straits to Russian ships. There is a lot of important news from the East. Here, the Russian private military company Wagner Group has been trained to engulf Bakhmut for more than 3 months, but pushed itself far beyond a sustainable limit of losses. Recently, the losses caught up Prigozhin and gathered the remnants inside the city. But even with the increased concentration of units in Bakhmut, Russian progress has completely stalled. Last time I told you that Ukrainians withdrew from School No. 7 and the nearby buildings, and that now they are holding the line along Kowalski Street. I also told you that the most intense clashes took place in front of the railways. The freshest report suggests that the main Russian objective remains penetration of the established defense along the railways. A soldier from the Ukrainian 240th Assault Brigade reported that there were a lot of indicators that the Russians received some reinforcements. He speculated that the Wagner forces relocated certain formations of Wagner special operators from Syria. Shortly after that, Ukrainian ground forces commander stated that Ukrainian forces had exhausted Wagner forces so much that the Russian military command had to send Spetsnaz, which is Russian special operators and airborne elements, to Bakhmut. What complicates the situation for Ukrainians is that all the separate elements are using different tactics. Some of them prefer infantry assaults in small groups. Some are aggressively using armored vehicles, and others are just waiting until Ukrainian positions are reduced to rubble. Because of such a high intensity of attacks, the Ukrainian 93rd Mechanized Brigade, which showed exceptional performance by holding the southern line, assumed control along the railways. Other detachments are responsible for more stable parts of the city or help the 93rd Mechanized Brigade on demand. The famous Ukrainian 1st Border Detachment to a large extent assumed responsibility for the southwestern part of the city, and Wagner forces tried to take advantage of the recent changes. Today, Ukrainian soldier reported that Wagner forces were attacking them non-stop for 3 hours. By suppressing the Ukrainian fire, they attempted to encircle this group. But Ukrainian Stamler requested support, and a second group of Ukrainians suddenly struck Wagner's from the flanks with RPGs, and the Russian attack was finally repelled. Recently released combat footage reveals that the Ukrainians made a successful counterattack and pushed Russians from school. Number 2. The video features a soldier who is firing from the school at Russian positions in the high-rise buildings. This is a very favorable development because it means that the southern supply road that Ukrainians are constantly using is even more secure. The head of the Wagner forces, Prigozhin, said that the Ukrainians had established a powerful strongpoint in the dense residential areas and has personally confirmed that Ukrainians indeed have tunnels in this part of the region. Prigozhin also said that regular Russian forces, primarily urban units, have completely substituted Wagner forces on the flanks. This is consistent with the statement of the Ukrainian Ground Force commander, more specifically that Wagner forces have been sustaining such high losses that by continuously plugging the holes in the front line with airborne elements, the regular Russian army gradually, completely assumed control over the flanks, while all Wagner forces are concentrated in Bakhmut. This is also consistent with the growth of one of Wagner's graveyards. Ukrainian soldiers from the 92nd Mechanized Brigade already noted that the assaults on the flanks are mostly conducted by regular Russian forces. Today, they released a video showing the result of their work and said that despite the fact that Russians reinforced Wagner flanks with regulars, their assault units have become smaller. Some analysts are saying that these irregular formations are just used to operating in smaller groups. But others say that operating in such small units in Bakhmut is senseless. So Russians are just losing men faster than they can replace them with reinforcements. Overall, Russian forces have been significantly exhausted in the Bakhmut direction, and the newly arrived regular Russian formations do not seem to have enough resources to conduct powerful enough assaults. Despite the fact that Prigozhin concentrated all of his forces in Bakhmut, the tempo of Russian advancement inside the city also decreased, and there were no confirmed gains today. Ukrainian defense line along the railways proved to be a formidable obstacle on their way, which will likely allow Ukrainians to hold Bakhmut for many more weeks.